Engineering at Stanford University. She received her Master and PhD in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Michigan, and her bachelor degree with honors in Material Science and Engineering from Brown University. She also was a postdoc in MIT from 2008 to 2009, and an assistant professor at LY State University from 2009 to 2014. She was also received the 2012 Design Automation Committee Outstanding Young Investigator and a former NSF graduate fellow. Her research integrates concepts from psychology, economics, and marketing into engineering design methods to better represent the user. So now let's welcome her and presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. So first question, raise your hand. Who knows what design is? Like who knows what design is? And some people feel confident about this? Okay, we got.
It's not engineering.
It's not. Well, we're off to a great start. So design can be engineering, and it can be other things as well. So I'm in the mechanical engineering department at Stanford, where design is housed, and designers look at products and services and systems a little bit differently than engineers do. We want to look at them holistically. We're typically the integrators, taking information from different places, and it might be very different types of information, like visual information on how a product might look, and trying to pair that with analytical information on how much a product might cost, and then emotional information on how people might feel about the look and the cost of that product together. So I'm here to talk to you about that in terms of transportation a little bit. This just says the same things that were said about me, but I want to point out I'm not a car expert. I'm a quantifying people and combining them with engineering models expert. Okay? So I do half of this talk is about cars, and then if we have enough time, the other half is about toasters. So you'll see that the methods of design can be applied to many different products. That being said, you have a variety of backgrounds. So if you have a question about something, feel free to raise your hand and ask, or just shout and ask. I don't care, and then I will do my best to answer it. So at Stanford, we focus on human-centered design, and human-centered design is about having empathy for people. Empathy for people means you understand both emotionally and cognitively why they're doing the things they're doing. So why they're making the decisions that they're making, why they're feeling the things that they're feeling, and what they're feeling, and what decisions they're making. So a lot of Stanford, you might have heard of the D School. Much of this knowledge about empathy is intuitive for designers. They spend years observing people, observing them using products, interviewing them, knowing how to design surveys about this, and they begin to understand people in a very special designerly way. But engineers like numbers, right? Because we need to understand people in a way that we can put them together with the miles per gallon or the cost of a vehicle. And qualitative information, non-number information, is not easily integrated with quantitative information. So to bridge the gap between typical empathy studies, which are qualitative, and engineering realm, which is quantitative, I developed this field called quantified cognitive empathy. And I take information from, or approaches from a variety of fields, and I apply it to design. So models of stakeholders' decisions are coming from behavioral economics, psychology, marketing. Optimization's coming right from engineering. Complex human decisions, that might come from something like behavioral economics or psychology, cognitive science. Interviews, observations, and surveying has its roots in ethnography and anthropology, and also marketing. Test versus control experiments brings in statistics, psychology, and then construction of preference is something from behavioral psychology, which is very important to my field because we'll talk about it later, but it states that people make decisions in response to the context that they're in when they make the decision. And that context is very important to all of us and the decisions we make. So I do models and I do experiments. And so today I'm going to show you an example of a model that I do and an example of an experiment that I did. And we're going to talk now about alternative fuel vehicles. So alternative fuel vehicles, hybrids, diesel, electric vehicles, you put them all together and they are only 7% of the US car stock currently, meaning on the road and for sale. Financial explanations cannot account for this. You might say, well, they cost too much. It's very rare that a person buys the least expensive car available to them. People pay for features in cars all of the time. And those features have developed worth to those people, even though sometimes those features do not have a lot of intrinsic worth in them. For example, chrome around the edge of a mirror on a car does not improve its functionality. It improves its aesthetics in a certain way, in a way that says, I have a new car from the 2000s or later, and I don't have an old car. So there's a special message that has now been imbued into chrome. And so people pay for things like that all the time when they buy cars, and they don't buy the cheapest car. So this argument that's frequently given that alternative fuel vehicles cost too much, in my opinion, is just bogus. We haven't spent enough time thinking about how to get people to care about alternative fuels. So while we spend a lot of time on the final choice, and this idea that cost is really important in final choice, we've ignored the process that people actually use to purchase vehicles, and more representative models that can encapsulate that process. And the one I'm going to talk about today is called consideration. And then I'm going to then talk about some experimental work that talks about changing people's consideration of products. So vehicle purchase decisions are currently modeled as what's called compensatory. If you look at this graph on the right, you'll see that for each of these vehicles, A, B, C, D, and E, there's an overall value of this vehicle. And if the value in one area, such as quality rating, is low, a value rating of a great price can compensate for that lack of value in another region. And that's called a compensatory model. That is the model that is very prevalent right now in transportation studies of how to encourage the adoption of alternative fuel vehicles. And these models can be formed from asking people to choose between different vehicles, which is called stated preferences, or these models can be formed from looking at the vehicles people have purchased in the past and creating these compensatory trade-offs based on purchase data. So you can either ask people to project what they would purchase, or you can look at data from the past. This is what a discrete choice survey looks like. A lot of the work at the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has used discrete choice surveys to predict what types of purchases people will make in the future for vehicles. These are all the same, these profiles, because I was too lazy to change the information. But you would have different prices here, like this one might cost $20,000, this one might cost $10,000. And you would ask people, pick one of these three vehicles. You would ask them to do this 20 times, 40 times if it was a number of years ago. It's a tedious process, but out of these choices and out of asking it to 200 to 2,000 people, you can build a model of what utility, what value these different features independently have in the final decision. So you could say gas has, the type of engine has a certain value to people, and gas is more valuable than hybrid, for example.
Is that true? Just what you said, or is that an example?
That's an example, and it's also probably true. Yeah, so both of those things. Yeah. So this is only equation you'll see. I just wanted to stick one in there because I'm an engineering professor. I gotta look tough. So this is just a basic logit model. The probability of choosing any one vehicle, purchase, is the utility of that vehicle being greater than the utility of all other vehicles available for purchase, okay? And that utility, that value of that vehicle is made up of a measurable and a non-measurable part. The error term is not measured or estimated. And the measurable part is made up of the sum of the value of all of these attributes. Okay, so you're going to add up for this profile what the value configuration is of all these attributes, and that's going to give you the utility or the value for that particular car. And if you want to know how likely it is that somebody's going to choose that car over all the cars that are available, this is the general formula that can make that prediction for you. So that compensatory idea is in there because this is an additive model. If one of the values, like the value of the engine, is lower for a certain car, a really good value in price can make up for that and keep the probability of choosing that vehicle high. So this is called discrete choice modeling or logit modeling. It's very prevalent in EPA work. It's been used to predict the adoption of alternative fuel vehicles, but also in transportation studies, where we look at the number of the amount of GHG emissions over time. And the one thing about it is they can only look at final choice. They can only look at the vehicles people buy, not the vehicles that they consider buying. So just a question of how many of you own a car? Any of you? Okay. So keep your hand up if you considered all 2,000 vehicles available on the market when you bought that car. Oh, okay. Good on you. That must have been a really long month. Carefully test driving them all. Yes. So the truth is that most of us, except for you, sir, can't possibly balance all of that information in our heads. So what we do to get to a smaller amount of information is we screen, okay? But that's not how the EPA is saying that we're making decisions right now. And it leads to problems. And this is a busy slide. But the one thing I want to point out is that in 2016, Green et al. Did this literature review on how prevalent the logit model was at the EPA and found that they are responsible for the majority of predictions, and also that there's a ton of unexplained variation in the estimates, and that there's just a wide range of things they're predicting. And my personal theory is that part of the problem with that is that they are using them in an exact prediction approach rather than a scenario analysis. And the reason they have to use that exact prediction approach is because the model is very inflexible. All it tells you about is final purchase. So if we can get some different models at the EPA that are more about scenario analysis and can tell you things about the purchase process rather than the final purchase, I think that's when we start to see the adoption of alternative fuel vehicles increase and better policies about how to get that adoption underway. Okay, so we were just talking about how we make decisions. Here's another approach. Instead of asking people to choose a multiple choice question, show them one profile and say, would you consider buying this car or not? That's a little bit more like what we do when we're in the purchase process and we're driving around or walking around and we see a car and we're like, oh yeah, Toyota Yaris. Do I want a Toyota Yaris? I don't know. It's probably too small and I don't think they use the best parts in that car, so I'm going to say no. Or maybe you just really like Fords. And so if you saw this, you would say, well, that's a Toyota and not a Ford, and so I'm not considering it. And you might be able to get through 30 or 40 of these profiles one at a time really fast, because you know your rules, and as you go through, you're gonna build those rules even stronger. And so we want to model consideration. So the problem with using logit models again is that without going into too much detail, there are mathematical properties of the generalized linear model and a lack of psychological representativeness that constrain the predictions that it will make in the vehicle domain, whereas modeling vehicle consideration, or the screening process, opens the door to modeling new things and being more representative of how people actually make decisions. So here is a visual representation of some of the things I just said. So imagine this is all 2,000 cars, or 7,000, I don't know how many there are right now, available on the market. You apply some rules, and these rules form buckets of cars. And when you have enough of the buckets, you get down to what's called the consideration set. And for most of us, these consideration sets exist of maybe 3 to 7 cars. It's not likely that you would have 15 cars in this consideration set. It's also not likely that you would have just 1 car in this consideration set. Very important is that attractive features cannot compensate for unattractive features. Do you guys, is everything okay back there? Yeah? Okay. Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Because I'm an engineer, I like to fix things, so let me know if I need to go back there and fix something. Okay. And then maybe after you get down to this set, you screen further, but maybe you then get into compensatory choice, where a great feature on one of these A, B, C, D, E cars can compensate for a poor feature on another one of those cars, and you're more juggling at that point. So let's apply this to a specific example. Let's say you were a fan of Volkswagen, and in September of 2015, Volkswagen had this scandal where they were caught using what's called a defeat device to pass the standard emissions tests. And this quickly changed the perception of VW and diesel cars. The perception of the diesel powertrain in VW vehicles were reported to change because of the scandal. And we used this data in our study. 30% of respondents would be less likely to consider a diesel vehicle, according to an Auto Trader quick poll, and 53% of respondents stated to have a complete or general mistrust of Volkswagen, according to Kelley Blue Book poll. So this is great for us as researchers because it gives us this snapshot of when consideration is really changing. Now, in this case, it was a negative change, unfortunately, but it's still a great thing to study, and we can ask ourselves questions about how the market will respond. So I created a little visual of this. So we have this considered set. Now we have a new screening rule that showed up. And this new screening rule might be, oh, no Volkswagens or no diesels. I just don't trust it, right? So if you have a set consideration set size, this new screening rule has made a void in your consideration set. There might be room now for 1 or 2 new vehicles, okay? And VW can try to capture that, or the competition can try to capture that. So here it is looking fancier. Suppose I don't consider diesel powertrain as triggered. How vehicles are in different positions are impacted, and what should they do to capture the consideration? So the questions that we explored in our model was how can U.S. hybrid electric vehicles respond to the consideration lost by VW, and what is the better approach for VW to gain back its consideration? They could reprice all their vehicles lower, try to get people back into their cars using price, or they could design a new vehicle. This isn't a diesel, this is a hybrid electric vehicle, and try to get their consideration back that way. So they have 2, or they could do both, but they have 2 approaches available to them. Now, when we want to use consideration versus a compensatory approach to modeling these decisions, we get into a problem with heterogeneous consideration. Now we have to think about what every person is making their decision based on, because we can't generalize about people's rules for their screening. We could generalize about their final purchase, and that might be one of the reasons that the EPA is so happy with the logit model, is it allows you to generalize across a population, and it makes calculations much more easy. But let's just say there's a lot of pretty challenging math in this that I'm not going to show you. But if you want to read it, if you like math, then you can read the papers that are associated with it, and I'll give you the references to those later, or you can go to my website at Stanford and see them there. So this is the case study and all of the models that are involved in it. This is something that designers do. So I talked about quantified cognitive empathy, so here is the quantification. We have these decision variables, price in the engineering model. We can design a vehicle for a different price, a different bore to stroke ratio, final drive ratio, battery peak power, a length, width, height of the vehicle, and the wheelbase. This is going into an engineering model that was created by Frischnecht and also uses EPA information. It gives a fuel economy model, a rollover score, and a cost model. Then that information goes to the attribute and levels of our configured vehicle. So that's put into consumer terms, like quality rating, miles per gallon, size, number of people that fit. And then here we have consideration rules coming from the population. That's how people are screening on cars. And then we need to know what the market looks like. What are the cars that are available? And that's coming from another source, Ward's data and JD Power data. So then we combine those consideration rules with what cars are available, and we get to what vehicles are considered or not, and we lay over this a before-after snapshot of how consideration changes with VW. And finally, we get to the objectives of our model, which is to maximize the consideration sets of VW vehicles or the competition, depending on the scenario, and to minimize the cost of these vehicles is a subset. So we're actually not looking at profitability in this. We're looking at minimizing cost, which is an easier thing for us to do, and because profitability involves like sales incentives and purchase structures, and it's almost impossible to model. All right, so what does this look like in terms of engineering problems talking to each other? So how many of you are familiar with optimization? Some of you taken an optimization class? Okay, that's a good number. So thank you for taking optimization. I love it. So here are two optimization frameworks. This is the typical one that's used in something like this. There's an overarching problem, this market problem, where you're trying to capture the market share. Maybe you're maximizing profit. And here's an engineering design subproblem where you're trying to design a car that does this maximization of profit. And you have to design the inners of the car in order to be able to communicate to the customer what features are going to be included in the product. Here is the modification we've made for consideration. So it's quite different. We're not maximizing profit anymore. We're not trying to design the most profitable car. We're trying to design something that people will just consider purchasing. And for alternative fuel vehicles, I think that's the right thing to be looking at right now, because it's just not working year after year after year to try to design them to be the one that people purchase. We first have to get our foot in the door, and we should have models that help us with that. So it's a little different in that we're looking at this intermediate problem where we're seeing if it's like a profitability screening. So we might design a set of cars and say, is this overall just going to make us any money at all? And if it's infeasible in terms of turning a profit, we go back to the engineering problem again. So it's a little bit different than the typical approach. Okay, so this is the decision that people are making about whether or not to consider a car. It is just a 0-1 vector of all the attributes in a car, and then each person has screening rules that either pull that 0-1 vector into their consideration set or reject it from their consideration set. And this is just the count of the number of different permutations of these different attributes that were available. And so we have these consideration rules coming from this model that was developed at MIT that I helped to develop while I was there. And we have the vehicles themselves and how they are configured coming from JD Power and Auto Trader information. A little detail on the engineering model, because we have to get these engineering variables over to the things that people care about in their screening rules. And so this just shows you the map between the engineering variables and how people interpret those as product attributes. So for example, the bore to stroke, length, width, height, wheelbase are all affecting the fuel economy. Some of them are affecting the safety score. Some of them are affecting the body class. And then we have some attributes that we just fixed, like the brand, hybrid or not, the number of cylinders, and the quality. And we always set the price higher than the cost. The model isn't allowed to sell something for under cost. And everything affects the fuel economy, okay? So again, the models that were used to create this mapping are from Frischneck's, Bias, and EPA. And if you want the long-form references, they're in the papers. This is probably more detail than we need right now. Okay, so the last part of this to be integrated is this change in consideration. So from AutoTrader, we got data on how people considered VW before and after the scandal. They were very simple survey questions. They went out right when the scandal happened, so they were nice, fresh data. And we had to map their answers to our screening rules that were in the MIT consideration model. So that's a little, you know, it would have been better if we could have gotten all the data at the same time, but rarely in life does that happen. So we made a map in between how people reacted to the diesel scandal versus what was in our original consideration screening rules. So this is our main optimization. Maximize the number of consideration sets that include the target vehicle. And then we had the engineering sub-optimization, which is to minimize cost with respect to the design variable vector. So that included all of the engineering things like the bore-to-stroke ratio and whatnot. So getting to the results. This is an interesting one. If you look at this from a consideration standpoint, it is VW cannot regain its lost market share with a new vehicle, period, or by repricing its entire fleet to the minimum price people are willing to consider. So if it pushes all of the vehicles in its whole fleet down to where price is just above cost and price is always in a range that people will consider, because sometimes people won't consider a price if it's too low, actually. They still cannot recapture the consideration they lost from the scandal. So that's a very important scenario analysis for VW, that it probably wasn't worth it, basically, for them to take that risk. It might not require a huge engineering model to get to that conclusion intuitively, but there's lots of other questions you can ask once this is built. This is a very different conclusion than a compensatory model would make, and this is really important. A compensatory model would say that if you reprice low enough, people will take that repricing and apply it to their purchase. So they'll say, oh, well, if it's that cheap, then I guess I will consider a VW, right? And our model would never let that happen. So the next thing we asked is, what does this mean for the competition? I apologize if this blue is a little hard to see. I have a feeling it is. But we looked at the Ford Fusion, the Ford C-Max, and the Lincoln MKZ. And we looked at how they're currently priced, and then their current fuel economy. And the diamond is without the scandal, refreshing only the price to try to steal market share from VW. And the dot is with the scandal, refreshing both the design and price. So you'll see that they all have the potential to steal consideration by moving their price down. But some of them, if they could change their fuel economy, if they could nudge it just a little bit, Lincoln in particular and the Ford C-Max, they could gain market share actually without having to reprice nearly as drastically. So the scandal has allowed them to only redesign for fuel economy and not have to take a big hit on their price in order to capture VW's consideration sets. And so finally, this shows that how these vehicles could get some of the consideration lost by VW. So Ford might be able to get 41% in the C-Max, in the Fusion it might be able to get 45%, and the Lincoln would only get 2%, but hey, that's better than 0%. But there might be a loss in profitability, because again, the model does not look at maximizing profitability, it looks at maximizing consideration. And I just want to remind you that behind those predictions are these very specific directions that Ford and Lincoln would follow in changing the very detailed design configurations of their car, things that engineers are more comfortable with. So obviously this approach has a number of limitations. I highlight the model we started with and the large variety of sources that we got our data from. This would be a start if one of these companies was interested in redesigning in the wake of this scandal. It would be better if they could get all of the data and all of the models from one source, which they could do because they have all of this stuff internally at their companies. But I don't have access to that. So there'd be much less validation involved. But think of it as a method that could be applied either by the EPA or one of these companies in order to think about alternative fuel vehicles differently. And these are the references, and hopefully you'll have access to the slides. I'll email them. So if you want to learn more about this work, you can look here. All right. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is how the heck do we change consideration sets? And so now we're going to talk about toasters. You all ready to talk about toasters?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who has a toaster? Okay, if you don't have a toaster, you got to get a toaster. Because toasted bread, after you toast your bread, you'll just wonder why you never had a toaster. That's all I can say. And I personally recommend like a little mini oven toaster. Those are the best. So, can we design to trigger consideration? Okay? And this is where I'm going to talk about construction of preference. So decision structures and outcomes, such as product evaluations and purchases, are constructed in response to the context of the decision. I love this example. If you need an umbrella, you walk outside and it's raining. If it's like pouring down, you're going to get a big umbrella. And if it's like a little drizzle, you're going to get one of those like compact umbrellas where you press the button, right? But the idea of this umbrella is that you're going to use it again and again and again in a variety of rain situations. But you're making the purchase based on the context of the decision, okay? That's like the easiest example to give. But there's lots and lots of things you do in your life, whether you want to admit it or not, that are based impulsively on the context in which you are making your decision. And so you can now overanalyze all of your purchases. You're welcome. Okay. So this was a toaster experiment, and I like to call these Mr. Potato Head toasters, okay? We had a design method that I'm not going to talk about today, where we encourage designers to think of features for toasters that would trigger people to think about sustainability while they were purchasing a toaster. And we had all these designers come in, and they thought of hundreds of features, and we chose the top 5, and we put them on toasters. So having 2 levers instead of 1, because then you're just toasting 1 piece of bread, saving half the electricity, right? This amazing power save button that does absolutely nothing, but makes people think about energy. So it works. It triggers people to think about sustainability. A flip cover, you hold that heat in, right? So you need less heat to do the same amount of toasting. Displaying the watts, the electricity used by the toaster instead of the darkness, okay? Or a number. And then embossed leaves on the side, just to give you that you care about the environment aesthetic. So those were the 5 features that we chose for this experiment. And what we wanted to know was if we included these 5 features, would it change how people made decisions? Would it change the context of their decisions? And particularly, would it change how they form considerations for purchasing these toasters? There were 2 different experiments, okay? The first was, they came into a room, a bunch of toasters were on a shelf, just like they would be at Walmart. None of them were functional, by the way, but they looked pretty darn good. And either they saw toasters that included those features, or they saw toasters and none of them included those features. So either some of the toasters included the triggering sustainability features, or none of them did. So the control condition was just a normal toaster purchase. And the test condition was, yes, there's some triggering going on. And then the other set of experiments were on a computer, but the toasters were sitting next to them. And again, the whole experiment either included these triggers or the whole experiment didn't include any triggers. And we just wanted to see how these triggers would change people's decisions. Okay, so in the first experiment, we asked people to place the toasters they would consider purchasing on the table. So we had like a physical consideration set that was formed. And then we asked them to write a letter to an agent who was going to buy a toaster for them, okay? And this is just details on the design of the experiment. It's not really that important. But let's say that all the toasters shared some features, and then the triggering toasters had other features, and the control toasters had dummy features. So what we found was that the trigger features changed the construction of preference in the written purchase instructions, okay? Dear agent, I would like a toaster that saves electricity. Here are some examples. I am not interested in a product which has a digital readout or clock or any indicator lights that will require energy usage when the toaster is not in operation. That was by our independent judges classified as related to sustainability, an excerpt of the letter. And then possibly related to sustainability was, a cover is not needed as I consider it just another part that can break down. So we had a huge effect. When people saw these trigger features, they were way more likely to put things like this in their letter than when they didn't see these trigger features, okay? So this is a screening rule, by the way. I'm not interested in a product which has a digital readout. So if they saw a toaster come up at Amazon that had a digital readout, they'd say, nope, not interested in that, not considering that. So these are not compensatory rules that are coming out in these letters. These are non-compensatory screening rules. So we are changing people's consideration sets with these trigger features. In other experiments, we saw that it changes their final choice of toaster to trigger them. And we hid, it's very impossible to see, but we hid meaningful sustainable attributes in the detailed information about these toasters on their shipping method and their energy usage. So separate from the triggers, like meaningful sustainability information. And we saw that meaningful sustainability information showed up in their choices, in their ranking of attributes that were important, and also in eye tracking. So even in how they read the information about the toasters, if we triggered them with those design features, we could get them to even process the information differently. So that's not related to consideration, but it's still pretty darn interesting. I mean, it is related to consideration in that it, will go into the formation of consideration sets, but it's like back a step from that in psychological processing. So we changed the construction of preference. So this is my final slide here, and then we can talk for 10 minutes. So what might be the implications for car design? So maybe, hopefully now, you're a little bit more interested in car design than you were at the beginning of this talk, because you can see that design can change people's behaviors, it can change people's purchases. It might be design that's the thing that gets people into alternative fuel vehicles, not fancy transportation scenarios or car changing or any of that stuff. It might just be that we are not thinking about how to get people to consider vehicles correctly, and that design can change that consideration. So using a specific design approach, could we motivate people to consider alternative fuel vehicles? And then once considered, adoption is a lot easier to solve, because these vehicles are competitive in comparisons that have already been screened on price. So once you're down to 5 vehicles, maybe they're all in a price range you would consider. We can get an AVF in there where we're in much better shape. And once within a consideration set, yeah, I just said that, and could we get a positive screening rule on AVFs, such as they are the only vehicle considered? I was just chatting with some students right before this, and I thought, well, what if we didn't have a policy that had a monetary incentive associated with buying a hybrid or buying an electric vehicle, but the government, not our current government, but another government, might say, hey, we're going to link up Chrome. Like Chrome on Windows is only going to be on hybrid vehicles from now on. Or, you're only getting a great stereo system if you're buying a hybrid, and that's just the way it is. And so they're changing people's consideration sets and to match features that they are willing to pay extra for, which is a feature that's really important. And instead of, financial incentives happening, they're now using design incentives to get people to consider alternative fuel vehicles. It's kind of a kooky idea, but it's definitely different from how we're thinking about it right now, which is all about money, 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 money. And that really isn't the bottom line in car purchases. So that's all for me. I'd love to take some of your questions at this point, and thanks a lot.